All right, so welcome everyone to our new media brown bag. This is sort of an informal kind of gathering where we can share our research. This came out of a conversation that Alexandra and I were having about all of the people across campus who study new media and digital scholarship and how it crosses so many disciplines. There really hasn't been much of a venue for all of us to get together and share that. So this should be a really fun event. We've got 4 panelists that we're going to introduce you to that are going to introduce you to their research. We will have time for questions at the end. So if you think of any as you're listening to everyone's presentations, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can wait to unmute yourself and ask them later. But to start out, I will introduce our moderators, first of whom is me. So I'm Brittany O'Neill, and I am the Humanities and Social Sciences Librarian with LSU Libraries. I work with history, English, political science, and women's gender and sexuality studies. And I am also the liaison for digital scholarship and technology initiatives across campus. And I will let Alexandra introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of English, and my research is on sexual discourses and digital spaces and sort of internet communities. And so I'm really excited for this panel. I was really hoping to meet more people who are doing similar kinds of research, and hopefully network and learn about new tools and sort of learn more about a field that I'm relatively new to in some ways. So I'm really excited for today.
Thanks, Alexandra. So with that said, let's go ahead and introduce our fabulous panelists who are joining us today.
Okay, so I'll introduce everyone in the order that we hope they will present. First up, we'll have Lauren Coates, who is an associate professor of English at LSU. She researches and teaches early and 19th century American literature with emphases on the environment, archives, and digital humanities. Coates serves as the founding editor of Archive Journal and editor of the Broadway Journal, a digital edition, and has had work published in J19, PMLA, Lehigh University Press, Digital Scholarly Editions, and more. She recently directed an NEH-funded institute focused on teaching digital humanities, which resulted in an open access publication of DH assignments and teaching plans by institute participants. She also does non-DH work and is currently completing a book about mapping North American space in the early 19th century. After that, we'll have Leah Powell Duncan, who graduated with her PhD in English from LSU in 2019. Her dissertation focused on Gilded Age print and literature, particularly representations of regions, surplus, and cheapness. As a PhD candidate, she worked as a graduate assistant in LSU's Digital Scholarship Lab. She is now the Digital Collections Librarian at LSU, and in this position, she works to assess and promote the Louisiana Digital Library. She spends a lot of time trying to keep her cats out of the background of video tutorials she's trying to record. Hopefully the cats make an appearance today. S.L. Ziegler is the head of digital programs and services at LSU Libraries, where they lead a team that manages the Louisiana Digital Library. Ziegler is currently co-principal investigator of a collection as Data Grant and organizes the LBL as Data Speaker Series, which focuses on thoughtful approaches to digitization selection and scholarly use in the realm of digital cultural heritage material. And finally, Ashley Mack is an assistant professor of rhetoric and cultural studies in the Department of Communication Studies at LSU. They are an interdisciplinary media critic and a justice-driven teacher of communication. Their research explores how differences and disparities are communicated and naturalized through media in contemporary US culture, particularly in digital cultures, and also how media is wielded by historically marginalized bodies and communities as a resource for creating a more just and equitable world. Their writing has been published in Departures in Critical Qualitative Research, Journal of Communication Inquiry, Women's Studies in Communication, Quarterly Journal of Speech, Communication and Critical Cultural Studies, Journal of Autoethnography, QED, a Journal of Queer Worldmaking, and Journal of Homosexuality. So as you can see, we have an excellent panel of participants today. I'm so excited to hear what they have to say.
So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will let Lauren take it away.
Thank you, Ashley and Brittany, for putting this together and for inviting me to be part of it. It's exciting to see so many people in this virtual room, including, I'm noticing, many who are more than adept at digital media in their own rights. I see Heather McKillop and many others who do a lot of work in digital space. So hope we can have a great conversation. So I just wanted to talk about two projects that I was involved in. I had a somewhat circuitous route to working with digital media that started with more sort of scholarly communications and how to leverage digital platforms to share information that I wanted to share, and has led to me learning more and more about digital methods and tools. And a lot of the work that I've done is really about, I'd say, 3 principles. I'll limit it to 3 because, you know, our manifestos can only have so many principles. But one is about access. I'm really interested in opening up digital spaces and methods to a wide range of peoples, so they can tell the stories that they want to tell and have an array of tools that they can use. About exploration, I mean, that's a very, I think in some ways a generic term, because I think that's a lot of what higher education is about, but also continuing to find ways that we can, I'm an early Americanist, so I look at a lot of old stuff, and I like to look at old stuff using old methods as well as new ones to see what sorts of perspectives can open up. And also collaboration. I really love working with people, and through my work with digital media, I get to work with a lot of different people in different institutions and different positions in the university. And the 2 projects that I want to talk about today actually were in collaboration with LSU Libraries, which is full of fantastic people. So I just want to mention one, which was, I feel like Alexandra can basically just give my presentation through her introduction to me. So Alexandra, take it over whenever you want. But one related to access and teaching. I use the classroom space, I think, a lot to help myself understand and experiment with digital methods, as well as trying to enable students to have new perspectives. So with a colleague at University of Georgia, Emily McGinn, she and I directed an NEH Institute that was about helping people who wanted to teach with digital humanities learn digital humanities. So there are people across the university, librarians, graduate student, departmental faculty, who were interested in doing this, but had not themselves learned how, right? Because it can be a little bit daunting, I think, because there are just so many things that one can do, and it's difficult to learn new things. So I'm going to put in the chat, if I am at all technologically competent, which is doubtful, a link to the anthology that Alexandra mentioned. And so Institute participants learned a lot of sort of simple methods and tools for grabbing data from Twitter or from internet sites, some simple tools for doing text analysis, for presenting digital exhibits or telling sort of spatial or timeline stories. And then everyone in the Institute created some sort of teaching artifact based on it. And so for those who are interested themselves in perhaps using the classroom space to experiment and learn both for yourself and your students, I encourage you to look at this and always reach out to me because I love to talk about ways to do these things in classrooms. And I'm looking at Kat Jacquet, who a couple of years ago did a fantastic project with students in her honors class. Maybe you can tell us more about it a little bit later, Kat.
Well, we wouldn't be able to do it without you. So I was lost in a sea of confusion. So it was really you and my students did it. I was just watching. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think SL was the one that like brought it to the fore. So, you know, collaboration.
That's what it's all about.
The connection. And so that's one thing I'm really interested in is pedagogy and classroom space and making digital methods something that many people can learn if they want to. And another project I want to mention, because it's something that I did in and with LSU Libraries, is a digital edition of the Broadway Journal, which is a 19th century literary magazine, primarily edited by Edgar Allan Poe, as well as several other folks. And one thing that there are a couple things I loved about it. One was that it was a sort of learning project for everyone. So for myself, for the multiple graduate assistants who worked on it, for library faculty and staff who we all learned, and with some successes and of course some failures, how to do this digital edition. And the thing that excites me about it is that on one hand, it's just back to access. Anyone who wants to read this somewhat obscure literary journal now can online, which I think is a good thing. And then secondly, we also spend a lot of time creating information about it, creating new data about it, particularly around questions of authorship and who is published in this journal and under what sort of conditions around anonymity. And so this was information that is of interest to historians, literary scholars, Poe fans, of which there are many. And this information is something that's not locked in the project, but something that we very deliberately made open and accessible. So if anyone wanted to, they could go to the site and download that data so they could ask their own questions of it as well. So this is something that I love because I'm interested as a scholar in 19th century literary culture, but also interested in as sort of a member of a higher education community and thinking about how the work that we can do can be shared, not just the end products, but also the beginning products. And I'll put the link to that, the Broadway Journal, in the chat as well for those who are interested. And I will stop there. And I'm always happy to talk about all things digital in the Q&A or other ways. So look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you, Lauren. That was wonderful. I know it's a very brief synopsis of all of the really amazing work that you do. Next, we are going to hand it off to Leah.
All right, hi everyone. I am going to try and share the entirety of my screen. Does that look good to everyone? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm going to use my time to demonstrate a specific text analysis tool. It's one of my favorite tools for text analysis. It will allow you to compare seemingly similar texts in a corpus of text to see how each individual text is unique or distinctive. And I'm going to demonstrate this tool using text that you could get from the Louisiana Digital Library. So specifically from our Louisiana Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project. This is a particularly rich collection of interviews from people who were involved in the civil rights movement in Louisiana. So what I would start out doing is compiling my corpus of text to analyze. So to do that, I would go to each of these interviews in this collection. Each interview provides you with the audio as well as a PDF transcript of the interview itself. And these PDFs are actually machine readable, meaning you could copy and paste the text out of the PDF to turn it into a plain text file. So to sort of collect my corpus of text for analysis, I would download each PDF, I would select the text, and I would paste it into a plain text file through a software like Notepad if you're on Windows, or TextEdit if you're on Mac. I would do this instead of using something like Word, because this is it's not going to add a lot of formatting that we don't need. That's just going to kind of gunk up our text analysis. It's just giving us the bag of words. We don't need it to be pretty. So I would compile my collection of text, and then I would head over to this tool. It's voyant-tools.org. Close out of that. I don't need it. And I would upload my corpus here. So I've already collected 3 interviews from this collection. These are the plain text files. So it's giving me this screen of various panels doing different things. And the first time I looked at this, I felt pretty overwhelmed, but we're just going to look at one tool. These panels are resizable. So I'm going to resize my desktop here to focus on the summary panel in the bottom left. So we've got some interesting data at the top here. We've got document length, vocabulary density, average words per sentence. But I want to look at this distinctive words. So distinctive words, this is a numerical statistic that is showing me what words occur frequently in one file, say our Jones interview, but relatively infrequently in the other files in the corpus. So it's not going to show me a word like probably Louisiana, which probably occurs frequently in all of the interviews. It's only going to show me words that are unique, relatively unique to each interview. I'm going to use this little items slider here at the bottom to show us 40 words instead of it's giving us by default 5. So if I'm looking at this Jones interview, I see words like daddy, southern, lumber, dance, rain, oil, morning, horse, cotton, field, horses. So we're getting sort of an agricultural theme here. In the Patio Johnson interview, I am seeing words like association, program, meetings, integration, organizations, benevolent activities. So here we're getting sort of a leaning toward maybe local organizing or committee work. And then in the Redden interview, I'm seeing words like registration, poverty, movement, slavery, outrageous, nonviolent, canvassing, outrage, opinion network. So here we're getting maybe a larger sort of theoretical view. And indeed, if you read these interviews, you see that the Jones was from a rural background. He did do agricultural labor, and we're seeing that in his distinctive words. Patio Johnson was an educator in Louisiana. She did do local organizing and committee work and that sort of thing. And Redden is a white woman who traveled to Louisiana from another part of the country for a summer to do voter registration and canvassing. And some of these words, you get a little bit more of a distanced perspective on the civil rights movement. So you can see how this sort of data, you might work into an argument about these different perspectives, even though all three of them are talking about a similar topic. So that is what I've got. I hope that's helpful. I'm trying to figure out how to get to the screen where I can see people. Okay, there you are. Yeah, and I'm happy to take, I know I went through that really quickly. I'm happy to take any questions about Voyant or what you might do with this tool in the question and answer. Voyant does a lot of things, and there's a lot of documentation available on how to use its different affordances.
Thanks, Leah. That was a really great presentation and very practical too. A lot of great applications for that particular tool. And I think now we're going to hand it over to SL.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share a PowerPoint because I know y'all love PowerPoints. I'm also going to share probably the least interestingly designed PowerPoint I hope that you will see today. Time did get away from me, but the content is here. Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me on this panel and for putting it together. I want to just talk a little bit about my work, which is mostly using digital collections outside of a digital library interface. So again, I'm a librarian. I spend all my time thinking about digital libraries, digital librarianship, and all the stuff that we digitize and put up. And also try to think about how we can use it beyond the interface for some of the uses that we've already heard about from both Lauren and Leah, and how to do this without being a jerk. So let's do it. First of all, I normally start this with who cares, right? Like, come on. But lots of researchers care about this. Obviously, probably everybody attending this panel cares about this, because we know that researchers and us, like all of us, we want to be able to ask questions of cultural heritage material that are not easily answerable, sometimes not answerable at all through a standard library interface. I don't have screenshots, but just if you need to, just close your eyes and think about the search returns and the browsing options. We all know what a digital library looks like. We all do our best, but we keep building the same things over and over again. Right, so you might think, well, that's easy, just give a download link. Yeah, no, but yeah, no. Or rather, like, yeah, not entirely. And the reason for this, a friend of mine once put it this way, and I really like it: embarrassment increases with visibility. So your dad dancing around the house in skinny jeans is embarrassing, but if he were to put that on TikTok and all your friends saw him doing that, it's more embarrassing, right? So ditto for harm. In the same way, making harmful materials more widely available causes more harm. So in the field of digital librarianship and sort of, and I know this overlaps with almost everything that y'all do, everybody listening to this. So we do think about the harm that's in our collections. Our collections were created by specific people for specific people, and we no longer want that to be the case. So we just have a lot of work to do. The librarianship field as a whole. Yes, happy to talk more about that. But right, some of the very specific things that really stand out: racist descriptions, right? We've got those intentional gaps. Like archival silences is how a lot of people would say this, but we just leave communities or individuals out. We leave whole events out. And then another thing is unwanted attention. There are people who do not want to be in our collection. Definitely don't want to be in our collection described the way that they are. And this matters a lot. Right. So then it's tempting on most days, most Wednesdays particularly, to just want to give up. But actually, we don't have to, right? Because, if we want to share our material widely and encourage use and reuse in all the fancy ways that all of you want to do with it, and y'all just build amazing tools, and we want to help you. We're librarians, and we just need to be about what we're putting into that it can be, because we're thinking about what you can get out, right? So we just need to ask a lot of questions about who our material represents and why does it represent them that way, how they are described and who got to describe them, what historical processes are rendered invisible by using this material as data. This one, if I could, I would just underline for just a second. So this is actually a big concern. I'm sure a lot of you see it. When you have a library record, for instance, and it says something kind of crappy about somebody else or another group of people, it's relatively easy to roll your eyes and be like, oh, somebody wrote that in the 1940s. We wouldn't say that now. But if you have an entire data set and you as a user cannot see where that data is coming from, that description suddenly takes on a different sort of a different feel, right? It's not as easy to dismiss it. Data has a tendency to look intimidating. It looks authoritative. So we're definitely worried about that. Okay. So that's all that I have. This is how I spend my day job. The Louisiana Digital Library has an LDL as data project ongoing, in which we are thinking about how to release all that material as data, while thinking very seriously about why we wouldn't, right? So not all of the material should be treated the same way, but that should be released. How can we do it easily? How can we take that opportunity to think more deeply about what's in the repository now and what's being constantly put in by all the people around the state who are doing that, really coming together as a community to think these out. If you, I can drop this in the link too, or somebody else could if you like, but we have a speaker series. We just had our penultimate, Brittany, that's for you, event today. So we have one more speaker series, and the LDL YouTube channel has all of the speakers you can watch and rewatch. There's just a ton to learn. I hope many of you find this relevant. And then I also have collections as data mentioned here for those of us interested in using data of a historical nature or data from cultural heritage materials. This is just a great resource that has input from a lot of scholars, librarians, and other practitioners about how to get that data and how to use it responsibly. gonna stop sharing now. That's everything that I have.
Thanks, SL. That was a really great, a very thoughtful approach to this kind of project. And thank you for the bringing it full circle with the SAT words. So with that, we're gonna bring in our final panelist of the day, which is Ashley. So Ashley, take it away.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. I feel so out of my league being here with you all. So thank you for having me here. And I hope what I have to say is useful. I'm just gonna chat with you all about my research. I thought about doing a PowerPoint, but then I just decided against it. Sometimes it's easier just to explain things. So methodologically, my research exists. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies, and my area is rhetoric and cultural studies. And what does that mean? Because those are big words. My research exists at this intersection of what we call critical rhetoric and cultural studies. So I understand rhetoric as it's constitutive and instrumental, meaning it makes meaning, right? It's suasive communication that does something. It constitutes normative values and beliefs in society. Communication helps us understand social notions of what's common sense, what's facts, what's truth, right? It supports power relations and systems of inequality in the world. And communication is also a resource for symbolic action for marginalized bodies to resist sort of systems of domination that have oppressed them throughout history. So I consider myself to be a critical scholar who just happens to predominantly study communication and digital cultures. I haven't only studied that, but it just happens to be that that's what I study. I came to study digital cultures in my dissertation. I was interested in how digital communities of mothers were circulating what I called maternity culture. And at that time, we were still, Facebook existed and Twitter, and Instagram, but it was mostly still predominantly blogs and Facebook that were the predominant spaces that people were communicating at the time. So I was interested in how ideologies of motherhood were circulated through online cultures, right? And how those community cultures connect to broader systems and patterns of power. So how we communicate on an online forum on the website, The Bump, right, has an effect on how we're communicating about breastfeeding in popular culture. And that also has a relationship to science and science rhetorics more broadly. So I approach this kind of research through critical methodology of digital cultures. And I see it really as telling a story about relatively disjointed communication and performances that occur in digital cultures and making connections between that communication and broader power relations and patterns of domination. So a majority of my work explores how power is reasserted and are challenged in new media and digital cultures. I understand, like most cultural studies scholars do, culture really broadly. What happens online is deeply tied to what happens in quote unquote real life, right? I mean, memes circulate and are connected to news events, popular media, and everyday performances and communication interaction. So if we're just thinking about digital culture as only what happens digitally, we're missing a whole big part of the picture. A really good example of that is, I think it was 3 years ago, there was a series of memes, it was Sharpie Gate, it was called, where President Trump, it was a hurricane that happened, and he had drawn using a Sharpie his own cone of whatever they call it, trajectory of where the hurricane was going. And then a whole bunch of memes started circulating online about using Sharpies to rewrite history, right? That meme occurred and was circulated digitally, but only made sense in what cultural studies scholars would call the conjuncture, right? The broader sort of connective tissue between political life, everyday life, politics, news, media, film, popular culture. All of those things converge in a particular historical, political context. We make meaning then digitally through that information. So I really see my job as a critical scholar as telling that story of those disjointed discourses, putting them in historical context, and trying to make sense of how they may or may not have an effect on broader power relations. As Alexandra noted, my research explores how difference and disparities are communicated. I've looked at feminist movements online, anti-LGBTQ rhetorics, YouTube communities where people post videos of home births, Twitter controversies surrounding trans writers. I just have an essay coming out about the rapper Baby Mother and how she sort of performs Black queer feminine refusal through her Instagram. How Indigenous feminists have organized online and challenged sort of dominant narratives. And I'm currently working on a project about how non-binary or MB communities on Instagram sort of make sense of what gender is through that medium, right? So how do they use visual representations, hashtags, comments, reposts and reshares as a way of sort of remixing what we understand gender to be, right? So I think that the big thing I wanted to sort of put forth as a critical cultural scholar is that studying digital cultures isn't just about studying the digital, and that we have to make sense of those communicative performatives in relation to their context more broadly, and that conversation and connective tissue between those acts of communication is really what can be interesting for us to examine. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm just geeking out with all of the really cool projects everybody has worked on and is working on. It just makes my little heart happy. So at this point, we're going to move into our Q&A portion. So if anybody has questions that they would like to ask of any or all of our panelists, you're welcome to drop them in the chat. Or if you would like to pop onto the mic, you're welcome to drop in the chat, pick me. So I guess I'll hand it off to Alexandra to start, since I don't see any questions in the chat yet. Alexandra, would you like to ask a question of our panelists?
Absolutely. So I think Lauren talked a little bit about sort of like old school methods, and I kind of would like to hear from everyone about what are the old school tools that you still rely on in doing work with all of these very, you know, fresh, upbeat topics, or using technological tools that are relatively new. What are the things, the old standbys that you can't do without?
Excel. I still use Excel and screenshots. I mean, that's like a majority of what I do.
I would jump in and say close reading. So I've had questions about text that I, thought I wanted to answer using a digital tool, some sort of like distant reading method, gathering data. And after playing around, you realize the best method you have sometimes is just your own eyes. But I do find that going back to a text after playing with it with a variety of tools sometimes tunes you into things you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
I saw Lauren with the pencil gesture earlier, the pencil and paper. Well, cool. While we're waiting for other questions, I have a question. I think something that's really interesting to think about is what inspires you to take on some of these projects. There's usually some impetus to start something sparks you. So what has been the spark that's led you to some of these projects?
I don't know if this answers this question, but I think it does. I consume a lot of information online, and I feel like sometimes, I don't know if other people feel this way, but there's just these gaps in connection between the stories that are being told. So somebody reads something on X platform over here, somebody sees this over here, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. And I think that I get really jazzed about trying to tell a particular kind of story to connect together those sort of disparate ideas to try to tell a fuller picture, and to make connections between ideas that potentially other people aren't seeing. So I think that trying to tackle that enormous problem that is never really going to be solved intrigues me and got me interested in studying this kind of work. I don't know if other people agree with that, but.
Yeah, I'll just speak up from my point of view. Ashley, I think I think you touched on this a little bit, but from my point of view, it's just basic frustration, right? Just like real annoyance with what we can't do or what's not quite being seen. So that was essential motivation. But and then it got started, and it just the closer, kind of like what Leah was saying before, the closer you look, especially if you're looking different ways, you start to see things that you didn't notice before. And now we're just up to our neck in it, Brittany. Oh my goodness.
I'll say for using specific tools as a digital collections librarian, sometimes the richness of a collection itself can be inspiring, and the data that's available in that collection, whatever you can get from it, kind of inspires the tools or the study you could do with it. And then also from my perspective, wanting to promote the use of our Louisiana digital library collections, thinking about tools that are sort of flexible, that could be used by high schoolers, but could also be used by a professional researcher, and sort of working with those types of methods.
I think as someone who is historically oriented, and I'll say at least cross-disciplinary. I don't know if I ever manage like true interdisciplinarity, but I like at least visit other disciplines, even if I don't do them. I'm really interested in how it is that we manufacture knowledge, and what counts sort of as evidence for different fields. And so I think some of my turn to the digital was a way to think about the different methods that I had on hand and that I've been taught in undergraduate and graduate school for analyzing literary texts and trying to think about what it is that they allowed me to ask or not ask. So I've really enjoyed exploring what else I might be able to see. And then sometimes, as Leah is saying, finding out that the old way was just perfectly fine for some things.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we have a question from Chris Barrett. Would you like to hop on the mic?
Sure, I do. And apologies for having the camera off. I've been having lunch during our brown bag. I'm just so blown away by the work that you've all been sharing, and I thank you for it. And I'm just so delighted to be your colleagues, to be your colleague, that your plural colleague. My question for you is that while you were talking about your work, I was really struck by how your projects help different aspects of our shared scholarly community work together to make knowledge for a wider public. Like, it was not just collaborative knowledge making, but also knowledge making in the service of convening broader communities of study and knowledge sharing. And I guess I just wanted to ask if any of you wanted to reflect a little on how you see your work as being like specific to the labor of a public university, or what kind of relationship you see your labor as having to the broader public that we all serve.
I can take a swing at that. Chris, that's a great question. I know that and Leah, you feel free to agree or disagree with this, but a lot of the work with the Louisiana Digital Library specifically is only possible because we're a public university, and we fall back on the mission of that, because this is a platform open to cultural institutions across the state. So we have something like 40 museums, libraries, public libraries, academic libraries, and museums, archives, contributing content, which is one of the reasons why Obsessed is strong, Chris. But we think so much about what's going in and how to really think about that thoughtfully and deeply, because so many different people are contributing. But the only reason that we can build an infrastructure so important to the entire state, and through our projects, hopefully to the entire world, is the public mission of our institution.
Oh, go ahead, Lauren.
Okay. I'll just say that I think for me, there's a real parallel between sort of my philosophy of digital humanities and the public education mission, which is to invite more people in and to empower people to learn and to ask questions. And so I think some of my work, with the NEH Institute, we were really interested in offering the Institute to people who didn't have vast resources, like many institutions do. I mean, LSU has wonderful resources, but also every institution has its lacks. And so we were really interested in trying to think about ways that people who might be interested in doing some work with digital humanities, what are some small, easy steps to get them there, and to make it sort of more accessible to more people? Because because I think if you talk to people who do digital humanities, often there's an incredible many different paths to it, but sometimes people have an interest but don't know like the first thing, one or two things to do. So it was really, as you said, to try to build a larger community for anyone who wanted to be involved in it.
Yeah, I would also add, so the communication studies discipline is like fundamentally interdisciplinary. We originally were speech teachers in English, and we got exiled, English people exiled us. But the purpose of communication studies originally, we were speech communication, and the goal was that like you taught people how to properly public speak or do oratory, and this made them better, more effective citizens. They could critically engage with communication. Communication studies is almost all only at land, sea, and grant institutions. We don't really exist at private Ivies as a discipline. And, the discipline of rhetoric in general has really transformed from being so focused on this old model of thinking about it, like, how can you become a more effective citizen, to also thinking about what citizenship is and how citizenship has historically been a category of exclusion, of who gets to belong in that and who doesn't, whose information is included in digital archives and whose isn't, whose histories are allocated and whose are not. And for me, I have felt that digital cultures in general, especially social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, now are fantastic spaces to think about the democratization of communication and access to power at a really big level, right? If you think about Black Twitter, right? Black Twitter has an incredible communicative and persuasive power in terms of national conversations now that we couldn't even have imagined a decade ago. And so for me, studying how communication in these digital cultures challenges power structures and relations is really important, because now we have so much access to the arguments made by the disenfranchised and the marginalized that we didn't have before. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much. I feel like this is it brings up such a good point about we can complain all we want about the lack of funding and huge endowments that we have at public universities, but with it presents some really unique opportunities for things like this. In the absence of any questions from other people, I have a very important question. We have an audience full of folks who do this kind of research, who are interested in this kind of research, good wide across the board here. But do you have any advice for folks who want to engage in research in an online environment going forward? What would you advise to folks who want to get involved in this kind of work?
This hasn't gotten mentioned yet, so I've obviously given other advice, but this is a big one, is to really think about the ethics of the engaging in these digital communities. If you're doing the kind of work that I do, at least, like, that's a question I'm always thinking of. SL was saying, like, do these people want me to study them and write about them? Do I need to, what kind of permissions do I need? How do I, Helen just asked this, how do you navigate IRBs? Which is super complicated. When I first started this work in 2008, I wasn't required at my doctoral institution to submit an IRB for publicly available communication. They said that it wasn't necessary. I was studying at that time YouTube communities. But then when I got to LSU and I was working on my book project related to the same thing, I was required to submit an IRB. And because, it was pregnant women it had to go through like a full IRB review, even though it was like digital representation of pregnant women. So certainly IRB, I think, is redeveloping their protocols in terms of that. I always submit an IRB exemption now whenever I'm doing anything with a digital culture. So if I'm studying Instagram and a community on Instagram, I submit one, even though they often say it's not human subjects. And it gets the exemption. I think that it's important that you do that just as like a thought process for yourself about whether or not this is important. Similarly, another thing I've learned is that Facebook groups, if they're private, you definitely need, so if they're not open to the public, you definitely need to submit an IRB. Again, often they get an exemption and you can, get consent forms to members of that public. But again, thinking about what is public and not public, who would people want you to write about this? Do you need to get their consent in order to write about their digitally produced communication? I think is something to really deeply consider, and something we, in general, those people who study those cultures need to think about more seriously as we move forward.
I think I would say something along the lines of like keeping it light in a way. I think especially if you're sort of trained as a humanist, it can be really overwhelming to start using digital tools that you don't have existing familiarity with. And there's this feeling of like, well, I'm not a computer programmer. I haven't trained for this. I've trained for something else for years and years. But I think starting with small projects that have sort of a low learning threshold can be really useful, and you can get a lot out of it, and it can open you up to different types of teaching and different types of arguments. Finding support if it's available to you, whether that's through the library or through an instructor who has some of these skills, or through online communities. And then also, like, kind of in the same vein, just keeping it exploratory. I think there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes of digital humanities that no one will see. I think that used to really frustrate me because there can be this, I can get in a mindset with digital methods that you're trying to build a thing that people will use. This sort of like craftsperson mindset where wasted time is just wasted time. But I know if I'm writing an article or if I was writing a seminar paper, I accept the reality that there's a lot of outlines and drafts. So I guess that same sort of unseen exploratory work, just remembering that that is also important, and it's okay to play around and not necessarily be building an amazing website that someone will see and use.
I'll second what Leah said. And it's something that you'll find many people say, but I always start with the objective, like what you're trying to accomplish, rather than just like, oh, I want to learn how a particular tool or a method. Tools change, methods change. They're always a means to an end. So think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then the question about IRBs made me think, because since I'm an early Americanist, IRBs don't usually come up. But some of the comments there made me think about something that some digital humanists work with, which are called collaborators' bill of rights or students' bill of rights. If you're doing projects with a team of people or with students, to be very thoughtful about why and how you're asking people to do work or working with them. And this has come up a lot, I think, especially with student experiences of engaging in projects. And usually it's to prevent students being sort of unpaid laborers in the research projects of their professors under the guise of a class. So you can always Google like a student Bill of Rights in digital humanities and find some of these, and they've been very helpful documents for me to think about how to build productive partnerships.
Thank you all for that. I haven't seen any other questions in the chat. Oh, Zach,
I have a question. Yeah, sorry. Oh, I didn't know we were putting them in the chat. I'm really bad with the chat. I never pay attention because then I can't focus. So this actually kind of touches on a few of the last few points, especially what Leah just said there about the question of ethics, and it actually just really hits on everybody's point. I had to write down my question so I don't get lost. So anyway, and I guess maybe even perhaps internal contradictions and maybe the future of even the humanities in this aspect, the digital humanities, right? In forms of like transhumanism, cyborgism, et cetera. But my question is this, and it's kind of directed at all four of the panelists, is regarding the formation of culture within critical rhetoric and in the preservation of, say, the representation of a historical record, people groups, et cetera. In what way are scholars in the digital humanities thinking about what some philosophers such as Elaine Badiou, and I have right here, I'm just going to quote, in fact, the mathematized language of science is in no way the language of opinions, including even the opinions on science. And so these questions of language and language being burdened by old law and by oppressive words, et cetera, right? Is this question then is, how then is it possible perhaps, or are people in your field thinking about the advent of things like the quantum supercomputing with GP3, IBM Q, et cetera? Does this pose a real danger to the digital humanities in that, can we actually trust humans with the ethics to choose, like as we were talking about the IRBs, to study people groups and to represent them? Or is it with perhaps this mathematized language of science with bits and now qubits, even the possibility of qubits, to create this new language that an AI, a supercomputing, would have to eliminate the ethics of the human element? What are people in the digital humanities thinking about this question? Are they thinking about this question?
I would say in critical rhetoric, they aren't so much thinking about the question of like, will an AI, replace, the critic, because the critic is fundamentally like a human actor who does the critical work. But I will say that in my own writing and in people who do writing like mine about digital cultures, that the reflexivity and the centering of the self as a human, somebody who is fallible, like I just wrote a chapter in a book that I'm writing about Law and Order SVU and how people on Twitter talk about episodes of Law and Order SVU. My ability to track the whole conversation about Law and Order SVU is entirely limited. There's no way I can ethically actually do that to the full extent. And so for me, that means acknowledging that short-sightedness and the inability to do that ethically in my own writing. As you engage, not to claim that I'm somehow producing a record that's fully representative. And I think that's something that historically archives in general, I mean, SL can probably talk about this more, so can Leah, but like historically archives in general have not been willing to admit their fallibility or incompleteness. And so what does it mean to have what I would call an ambivalent posture towards the archival impulse, like that we cannot ever achieve a place of full knowledge or full representation, a true representation of something? That to me is an ethical turn that's really important in critical scholars who do this kind of work. But yeah, I'll say
right.
I don't know.
It's interesting that I think as well, just the point that, ethically we can't read all of that, but I think the number one fastest computer right now can learn everything a human learns in a lifetime in 18 seconds, I think is where we're at right now. So it's crazy to think, right? It's just,
yeah, but at that point, then you're also, I mean, you could get into the weeds with this, but like when you are, what are the limits of a computer? You put rules on a computer and a computer follows those rules exactly, right? That in and of itself is a rule that should be troubled, right?
Right. Well, that's what I mean. People like Marx, Tegmark, or whatever would say that's the problem with AI, is if it can then, which of course is theoretical, it's all philosophical. But
I mean, and most people who study power relations, like I do, would argue that like as rules of power and hierarchy change, those things become dominant, right? So like an AI doing that without any human discernment would be troubling in and of itself, right?
There's been a lot of talk in DH over the past few years, I think, about this sort of the neoliberalization of a university and some skepticism about the turn to digital methods as a way to just like justify humanities using the language of science and math. And I'm reducing this incredibly, and there's been people on both sides. I think that some of the most interesting work that digital humanists are doing really centers in ways that Ashley is talking about, the human or the humanist perspective, because often it's questions of ethics and I think questions of interpretation. And I do not know enough about AI to answer questions about whether AI can interpret. I'm sure there's someone in this room who may be able to do that. But it's really emphasizing the humanist in digital humanities rather than the digital. And I'll just, I think Rick Godden in the chat had a great question to Zachary's comment about a computer learning everything that a human can in like however many seconds, and like what does learn mean there? And the humanists, you know, will ponder that for like the next 2 hours.
I think that's a really good question for us to play with, of, you know, what is learning, what can it learn, where does wisdom come into play with the knowledge that it might pick up? Does anyone else have any other questions, or Alexandra have any other questions as we get closer to our 1 p.m. end of lunchtime?
Does anyone want to verbally articulate a question as the last one that we take before we wrap up? I have a question up my sleeve, but I want to prioritize the audience. Okay, my other question is, how do you tackle, and this is relevant to what we've just been considering with AI and changes in language and the capabilities of computers, but on like a day-to-day level, how do you tackle new unexpected changes in the technology you're working with, whether that's a platform update or a tool that shows data in a new light that maybe changes your own thesis or something like that? So I'd be interested to hear about, just on a day-to-day level, how you deal with those kind of technological changes.
The one thing I'll add about that this made me think of is it's really important, especially if you're doing, like I do, study discourse or visual representation online, that you capture the things it's okay that you study something that no longer exists the way that it existed before, like that you study a past version of something, but it's capturing through screen grabs, through video. I do video grabs. So what I'll do is I'll like screenshot, I use OBS and I screenshot my screen video, my entire thing. And I'll go through the whole website, you know, that I study, because I'm wanting to get the full experience of a particular website I'm looking at, because you cannot expect that anything you look at today will be there tomorrow. And so for the purposes of your own archive, I think that that's really important, because stuff just changes all the time. So I know that that's been an issue I've faced, and I would encourage others to think about that proactively.
I'm just thinking about how you can always find that academic book with the footnote on page like 153 that says, you know, after the time, like, while this book was in press, this wonderful research just came out, and I wish I had more time to engage in it. So in some ways, I'm less troubled by it, because it seems like the work of higher education and of knowledge production and acquisition is always moving. And so it seems like not a new problem. Although that's also speaking from someone who has the benefit of working with technologies and things that are fairly still slow. So I think Ashley's perspective, you know, about some of these web-based communities and social media communities, I mean, those move and change much more quickly. But
Okay, well, I think we are just about right at the 1 o'clock mark. Wonderful, we did so good on time. I know we condensed so much information into such a short amount of time. I want to thank our fabulous panelists for sharing their knowledge and their wisdom, and also thank Alexandra for co-hosting this with me. I think this has been a really good discussion, and I hope that we'll have more of these in the future, because it seems like there's a lot of interest. And thank you so much to our attendees for your great questions. I have recorded this session, so there will be a recording. If you want to go back and redigest this information, I will send that out to everybody as soon as it's available. But applause.
Thank you so much for the labor of putting this together.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for everything. It was so great.
Thanks, everyone.